Hello, North Penn School District. My name is Daniel Krueger, and I'm here to present on the latest changes to FERPA. So what is FERPA? FERPA is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records, which are maintained by schools or educational agencies or institutions. And FERPA would apply to any school or institution that is receiving federal funding. And North Penn certainly does receive federal funding, so FERPA does apply to us. Okay. So what FERPA does is it affords the parents certain rights with their children's education records. There's the right to inspect and review the educational records. There's a right to seek to have their education records amended, and then probably most importantly is the right to have some control over the disclosure of the educational records or personal identifiable information. Now, once the student reaches the age of 18 or starts some type of post-secondary education, they then become an eligible student, and these rights that I just mentioned would transfer from the parents to the students. So what information does FERPA protect? Well, FERPA would prevent the disclosure of things like student grades, health records kept by the school, disciplinary records, GPAs, attendance records. A few things that FERPA does not prevent the disclosure of, like any private note that you would jot down over the course of teaching. Usually, like peer-graded papers aren't an issue because those grades aren't prevented from disclosure from FERPA, at least before they are recorded by the teacher. Any alumni or employee records or any information that's considered to be just like directory information is not FERPA protected. So, FERPA in the digital age. FERPA was first passed in 1974, and obviously since then a lot of things have changed in education. So we're using a lot of outside resources, things like Infinite Campus and Canvas, and they hold a lot of student data. Now, North Penn School District is ultimately responsible for that data, which is why we always want to make sure that we choose vendors and third-party providers that are FERPA compliant. And really the same laws and regulations would apply to those vendors as they would to their school. So that way, therefore, it's very, very important that the school is responsible in choosing vendors that are FERPA compliant. So you might find yourself in an awkward situation where somebody from ICE or the Immigration and Customs Enforcement would come in wanting some information on children. Now, just remember that as a public school, it is our job to kind of teach to any child that's residing in our district. So we really cannot inquire about the student's citizenship or immigration status. So if ICE shows up at the school and seeks student records, or the students themselves, you want to make sure that we ask the ICE personnel to identify the legal basis for the request. And unless there's a legal mandate, the ICE agent should not be permitted to access the student personal identifiable information. Now, there is a health and safety exemption within FERPA. Okay? And this really applies to our school resource officers. Remember that the school resource officers are considered to be school officials to whom the school may disclose information without consent from the parents or the educational records. So the FERPA Health and Safety Emergency Exemption would allow this personal identifiable information to be disclosed to, like, a police officer or a healthcare worker if an emergency situation does exist, and it's really up to the school leaders to make a judgment on that. We do have surveillance cameras in just about all the schools in the district. Okay, so when we're looking at that surveillance footage, you gotta remember that the FERPA does apply to the images of students that are captured on the surveillance when the recording is directly related to the student. So when that happens, that recording of the student is considered to be an educational record. All right. So if the recording is used for disciplinary action, if the recording depicts anything that could result in disciplinary action, or if we're focusing on a specific student, those are all considered to be educational records, that's captured by the surveillance camera. All right. If the student is like, just kind of like in the background at a recorded sporting event, then it is not considered to be a educational record. All right. Also, if a parent requests surveillance footage that directly relates to their student, the school must comply, because it is one of their rights under FERPA to have access to that footage. Now, I know we all work very, very hard to avoid FERPA violations. However, from time to time, we have seen some unintentional violations. All right. So some common unintentional violations would be like throwing away student records instead of shredding them, not thoroughly screening vendors to ensure that they are FERPA compliant, posting pictures of students on social media, talking publicly about someone that you read on a school record, not knowing when to release or withhold a student's educational records. All right. And then this is the big one. Although it's not a FERPA violation per se, it's not recommended that student information is sent through eternal email. All right. Again, it's not an outright FERPA violation. There's just more secure ways of sending that information. All right. So what happens if a FERPA violation has occurred? Remember that under FERPA, individuals do not have the right to sue the school. The only available option to parents is to file a complaint with the Family Policy Compliance Office in the U.S. Department of Education. And if the investigation reveals that there is a FERPA violation, the school would have to implement some policy or procedure to ensure that similar violations do not occur in the future. Right? Now, if the school kind of refuses to implement anything and continues to make violations, the school may be cut off from federal funding. This is a very, very extreme scenario, and it has not happened in the 40 plus years of FERPA's history. All right, so how do we stay FERPA compliant? Number one is doing what we're doing right now, and that's just raise awareness of FERPA. Acknowledge that everything under FERPA applies to North Penn because we do receive federal funding. All right, we want to make sure that all school employees are trained under FERPA. They want to be trained so they have knowledge of the rights, protections, and exemptions that are guaranteed under FERPA. When we're choosing vendors, like third-party vendors, we want to make sure that they are also compliant. Right. Also, we want to make sure that we are properly encrypting files and protecting our emails. and just using as much caution and prevention tools as possible. Okay. Now, FERPA does not require that schools or institutions destroy education records. So each school is able to kind of establish their own policies or timeframes for the destruction of records after they've become useful or not needed anymore. So it's considered best practice to kind of minimize the data that we're holding on to. All right. And destroying records when they're no longer needed is kind of a key element for the fair information practice principles. All right. And then the sensitivity of the record may determine how it's destroyed. So remember that simply, crinkling up a piece of paper and throwing it in the trash is not a good practice, or just kind of like, deleting an email so it sits in your trash bin is not a good practice. All right, we want to make sure that we are thoroughly destroying any unneeded educational record. So FERPA and North Penn. North Penn is fully committed to FERPA compliance. All staff is trained to avoid FERPA violations. All third-party vendors are carefully monitored for FERPA compliance, and all unneeded records are appropriately destroyed. All right. If you're ever unsure if information is FERPA protected, please ask someone before disclosing anything. All right. And finally, here are my resources that were used to make this presentation. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.